Colombo is one of those cities that doesn't reveal itself immediately. At first, it feels fast, loud, and almost overwhelming. But underneath all of that movement is a completely different rhythm. This is a city of old colonial buildings and modern towers, busy markets and quiet temples, luxury shopping malls and simple street food stalls, all existing side by side. And the more time you spend here, the more those contrasts begin to make sense. Started my morning at the Old Dutch Hospital, one of the oldest colonial buildings in Colombo. Places like this always remind me how many different lives a city can hold within itself. What was once a hospital built during the Dutch colonial period is now filled with cafes, restaurants, and quiet courtyards where people slowly drink coffee in the shade. The thick old walls still carry the feeling of another time, even while the city outside moves endlessly forward. And somehow, Colombo already felt exactly like that to me. Old and new, existing together without really trying to separate from one another. The easiest way to understand Colombo is probably not through museums or itineraries, but simply by moving through it. Through open tuk-tuk windows, through traffic lights that don't seem to matter very much, through small glimpses of everyday life happening between one street and the next. One moment there are old colonial facades, the next glass towers rising above palm trees. Near the coast stands the old Lighthouse, quietly watching over the city that has grown around it. It almost feels forgotten now, not abandoned, just left behind by time. Just nearby stands the newer Colombo Lighthouse, which is worth a short stop if you're already exploring this part of the city. You can't climb all the way to the top, but you can walk up to the base and get a closer look at the structure, the coastline, and the movement of the streets around it. It's not a long visit, but it gives you another small perspective on Colombo's connection to the sea. For me, this part wasn't about a dramatic viewpoint. It was more about noticing how quickly the city changes here, from official buildings and coastal roads to monuments, traffic, and quiet details that are easy to miss if you move too fast. It's a city that still feels unfinished in many ways, like it's constantly becoming something else. From the lighthouse, another landmark immediately catches your eye. Sambodi Chaita, rising above the road on its tall concrete arches. From above, it almost looks like it's floating over the traffic, while tuk-tuks, buses, and people continue moving beneath it, as if this unusual structure has always belonged there. This quiet Buddhist stupa lifted high above the movement of everyday Colombo. It's one of those places that shows the city's contrasts perfectly. Devotion above, traffic below, and life continuing in every direction. Back down at street level, Colombo becomes loud again almost immediately. The market was one of my favorite parts of the city. Not because of any specific attraction, but because it felt completely alive. Barefoot workers carrying vegetables through narrow passages. Hands stained by spices. Beautiful tropical fruits arranged in impossible colors. There's something I always love about local markets in Asia. They feel messy and beautiful at the same time. Nothing curated, nothing designed for tourists. Old wooden trucks standing quietly between crowds of people moving in every direction. Just everyday life unfolding exactly as it always has. And right next to the market stands the old town hall building, another reminder of Colombo's long and layered history. The large colonial-era structure feels completely different from the busy streets surrounding it, almost like stepping into another period of the city for a moment. Inside and around the small museum collection are old uniforms, vintage vehicles, machinery, fire engines, and historical objects connected to Colombo's past. What I found interesting was not just the collection itself, but the contrast between everything happening outside and the quiet atmosphere inside. Just a few steps away, the market continues moving at full speed, while here, pieces of old Colombo remain carefully preserved, surrounded by the modern city that grew around them. Colombo is changing incredibly fast. Entire new districts are rising along the coastline, especially around the massive port city development built on reclaimed land from the sea. Glass towers reflect the sunlight, while old colonial buildings still sit quietly nearby, like witnesses to another era. There is something strange about standing between these two versions of the city, one already full of memory, and one still being imagined. You can feel Colombo stretching toward the future, but not completely letting go of its past. Sometimes the city feels uncertain about what it wants to become, and maybe that's exactly what makes it interesting. Not far from there is one Galle Face, one of Colombo's modern shopping malls facing the ocean. Inside, everything feels polished, cold, and carefully controlled. A complete contrast to the heat and movement outside. But what I loved most wasn't really the mall itself. It was stepping back outside afterward and seeing the sea again, feeling the wind coming from the Indian Ocean, watching the skyline slowly changing in the afternoon light. In Colombo, even modern places never feel completely disconnected from the outside world for very long. One of the most recognizable buildings in Colombo is the Red Mosque, officially called Jami Ul-Alfar Mosque. Its red and white facade almost doesn't look real at first, rising above the busy streets like something from another world. It's located in the Pettah area, so it's easy to combine with the market, the old town hall. Even if you only see it from the outside, it's worth stopping here for a few minutes. For me, it was one of those places where the city suddenly becomes theatrical. Traffic passing by, people moving everywhere, and this extraordinary building standing above it all, calm and impossible to ignore. And not far away, another atmosphere entirely begins inside the Hindu temple. Flower offerings piled near the entrance, incense smoke drifting through the air. Soft prayers echoing somewhere deeper inside. The ceilings, the statues, the colors, the details. Every surface feels alive with symbolism and devotion. Even without fully understanding everything, you can still feel the energy of a place like this. And I think that's one of the things I love most about travel. Not always understanding completely, but still feeling connected to something. After all the movement of the city, the lake felt almost unreal in its stillness. Large white birds moved slowly across the water, while the small Seema Malaka temple reflected quietly on the surface of Beira Lake. Designed as a place for meditation and rest, the temple almost seems to float above the water, separated from the noise and movement of the surrounding city. For a moment, Colombo stopped feeling loud. It's strange how cities can hold both chaos and peace at exactly the same time. This became one of my favorite places in Colombo, mostly because it was only a short walk from my hotel, and I kept finding myself coming back here again and again in the evenings. Not really to see anything specific, just to slow down for a while, to watch the birds crossing the lake, listen to the distant sounds of the city, and feel that rare kind of calm that sometimes appears unexpectedly while traveling. The kind that makes even a busy city begin to feel familiar. Toward sunset, Colombo slowly begins moving toward the ocean. As the heat of the day softens, more and more people gather along Galle Face Green, the large oceanfront promenade stretching beside the sea in the heart of the city. Families arrive carrying snacks and plastic chairs. Children run through the grass with colorful kites pulled high into the strong wind coming from the Indian Ocean. Couples sit quietly facing the waves, while groups of friends gather along the seawall talking for hours as the light slowly changes around them. This is one of the best places in Colombo to simply observe everyday life. Not because there is one specific attraction here, but because the atmosphere itself becomes the experience. Street food vendors move constantly through the crowds, selling fruit, spicy snacks, toys, bubbles, sweets, and small, colorful objects that somehow seem to appear from nowhere. The smell of fried food mixes with salty ocean air, while waves crash heavily against the promenade below. And somehow, despite the crowds, the atmosphere never felt stressful to me. There was movement everywhere, but it felt soft, relaxed, almost comforting. Even the cobra snake performers felt like part of the rhythm of the evening, rather than something made specifically for tourists. What I loved most about Galle Face Green was how local it felt. Compared to many famous waterfronts around Asia, this place still feels deeply connected to the everyday life of the city itself. There are tourists here, of course, but most people come simply because this is where Colombo comes to breathe at the end of the day. And I completely understood why. After hours spent in traffic, crowded streets, temples, and markets, the ocean suddenly opens everything up again. The horizon becomes wider, the air cooler, the city softer. I found myself slowing down here without even trying to, sitting on the edge watching the waves crash below, watching children chase kites through the wind, watching the sky slowly turn gold over the Indian Ocean. It felt less like visiting a tourist attraction and more like briefly becoming part of the city's daily rhythm. And as the sun slowly disappeared into the haze above the ocean, Colombo itself seemed to change once again. The noise softened, the light faded, the wind became cooler. And for a few quiet moments, the entire city felt suspended somewhere between chaos and peace. And then the rain came. For a few minutes, Colombo softened completely. The noise became distant, the heat lifted, and the whole city seemed to disappear. I love these quiet in-between moments while traveling, when nothing really happens, but somehow you feel the place more deeply than before. At night, Colombo doesn't become quieter, it just changes rhythm. Streetlights reflect on wet roads, small restaurants fill with people, and the sound of kotu being chopped on hot metal grills echoes through the streets. It's messy, loud, chaotic, and somehow incredibly comforting at the same time. As darkness settles over the city, the Lotus Tower begins glowing above the skyline in changing colors. The streets remain alive far into the night, but the atmosphere feels softer now, slower. And after spending the entire day moving through Colombo, I realized that the city never really tried to impress me in obvious ways. It revealed itself slowly instead, in textures, in small moments, in contrasts. And maybe that's why I ended up liking it far more than I expected. Mosul travelers pass through Colombo quickly on their way to somewhere else in Sri Lanka. But I think this city deserves more patience than that, because Colombo is not really about landmarks or bucket list attractions. It's about atmosphere, movement, heat before rain, the smell of spices in crowded streets, the feeling of standing between the old world and the new one at the exact same time. And the more slowly you experience it, the more the city begins to stay with you.